welcome to another episode of the Modern Brewer Podcast with me, your host, Chris Lewington. Today we're going to explore something that on the surface sounds a bit drab, but actually this topic blew my mind when I was researching it a while back, and I've been waiting a long time to nail down the best guest to take us through the same journey I did. We as brewers are required to learn, manage, and control so many processes and procedures, and it always seems like our resources are stretched. Whilst I miss a lot of things about working day to day in a brewery, having stepped outside has allowed me so much time to research and focus on topics that mean a lot to me, add value to you and the brewery that you work in. So wherever you listen to this podcast, whether it's on your commute, in the car, or on your early or late shift, all you have to do is listen and absorb this information and see how it can apply to your brewery. And this is exactly what we will do in this episode. And it's all about how we cool our beers, something that we rely heavily on in every brewery I've been to. It works in the same way. You set a temperature and your temp probe reads the temperature. If it's around 0.5 degrees above the temperature, it'll allow the flow of glycol continuously through the cooling jackets until your temp probe reads the correct temperature and it will stop. It's incredibly simple and in most cases, very easy to control. However, what is the price of this simplicity? Do you know what? A good rule of thumb in sustainability and, to be honest, in life is if it's convenient, then it's probably bad for the environment. And that is exactly the case here. Continuous cooling works. There's no doubt about it. But have you ever heard of batch or pulse cooling? What is batch or pulse cooling? What are the benefits? How can it be implemented into the brewery with the same ease of control as your continuous cooling system? Well, we are going to learn about all of that and more in this episode. Firstly, did anyone see my Instagram post last week? I really hope that you did. I partnered even further with the previous episode's sponsor, Fifth Column. They actually made me some sick Modern Brewer Podcast merch. If you haven't seen it, go check out my reel showcasing it on Instagram. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see me wearing the t-shirt right now. There was just a bunch of interest in the merch, which was really, really cool to see. It actually made me super happy. People were like, "Oh, can I have a t-shirt? You know, I really like the design. Can I help out?" And I was just like, yeah, it was so sweet. So thanks to everyone who reached out. It was honestly, it meant the world to me. So I'm going to do a Modern Brewer Podcast first, and I'm going to offer out some free Modern Brewer Podcast merch. All you need to do is share the podcast on Instagram or LinkedIn. Please make sure you tag me in. My tags are on Instagram is Chris, 2 underscores. So Chris __ Brewington. So that's Brewington. As incredibly, there was actually 2 Chris Brewingtons before me who decided on that name, which kind of blew my mind. Then on LinkedIn, it's just a bit more vanilla. Just search Chris Lewington in and I should come up, I hope. Once you've shared and tagged, the tagging is the important part so I can see it. My pal, Jack Coomber, will enter you into a draw to win free merch and get a sweet shout out on the show for being a total legend. I'll DM the lucky winner and I'll do one every episode for now. Also, just letting y'all know, I'll actually be attending both days of the Brewers Congress in London on September the 23rd and the 24th in 2024. One of the best events in the calendar, in my opinion, and it's ran by some of my favorite people in the brewing industry. You listeners will already know one of my companies, Brewing Trade, a trading platform for brewers to buy over-contracted hops, meaning you get brand new hops at prices you literally won't believe. And for the Brewers Congress, we're actually going to do something really fun. I mean, look, basically, we're a company that's 7 months old, started out by a couple of brewers and some friends from home. It started entirely with our own money, which wasn't a lot. So we can't really afford a stand or sponsorship there. At the moment, we will in the future. So this year we are going to give out free Brewing Trade t-shirts to wear on the 24th, the second day. And for anyone who wears them during the event, we will buy you a pint in the pub afterwards. If you are interested, please let me know and I'll get a t-shirt over to you ASAP. Should be a fun one, and always great to hang out in the pub after the event anyway, which is actually, 50% of where the fun happens. On top of that, I am also running 2 panels. So it's going to be an action-packed event for me, to be perfectly honest. I also help to judge on the awards as well. So I'll be at the award ceremony on the Monday, which is the 23rd. But I'll give you details on the panels in the next episode when it's going to be a bit more confirmed. But if you want closer, more live updates, please just follow me on socials. I'll definitely be talking about them on there. So yeah, the Congress is going to be a big one. I love that event. So yeah, it'd be great to see any of you down there. Please, anyone who listens to the show, please come over and say hello. I'll be most likely wearing this Modern Brewer t-shirt, so you can always catch me if you haven't seen my face plastered all over the podcast tile anyway. All right, so let's get going then. With me on this episode is the guy who actually first brought pulse cooling to my attention. His name is Jassa Amir-Lang. He co-founded a company called Frigid that helps breweries switch to pulse cooling. So we first got talking about the environmental savings naturally, and yeah, I just started really doing my own research into what the technology was, and as I said, it just blew my mind. And with him is actually an Australian brewer called Alex Marschall. He co-founded Modern Brewing in Adelaide, Australia, and he's going to be joining us. He's had pulse cooling in his brewery, so I always like to try get someone who's talking about the tech and someone who's implemented it, so you can hear what it was like for them. And I'm recording this one at 7 a.m. my time, which a time I rarely socialize with anyone. So I apologize if I come across differently in this one, but you know how time zones work, and I'm at the mercy of the scheduling here. Okay, and all the way from Australia, welcome to the show, Alex and Jassa.
Thanks. G'day, Chris.
Yeah, good day, guys. Well, look, how about we start with you, Jassa? Can you just let everyone know who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name's Jassa Amir-Lang. I'm the co-founder at Frigid Cloud, which is a Australian-based fermentation control and sustainability platform, working with breweries around the world.
And I'm Alex. I'm currently own and brew from Modern Brewing. So we're just a small brewery, bar and venue in Plant 3, Bowden, South Australia. We've been open for about 3 years now, producing all sorts of beers and hard lemonades and other products right here.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've actually never been to Australia, but I've heard the beer scene's pretty popping over there. How is it at the moment?
Yeah, it is pretty good. Still growing a lot, but I guess, seeing a lot of similar issues to all over the world as well. So yeah, it's fun to be a part of. Yeah, been a fun 3 years.
Yeah, man.
To get you over, Chris.
I know. Do you know what? It's definitely on my bucket list of places I want to go. Yeah, that and New Zealand. The combination. It's a good old flight, so I'd probably have to do them both in the same time, I reckon.
That's it.
Yeah.
All right. So, because you're the one who actually first brought this whole thing to my attention, really. So, if you don't mind just going through what the theoretical principles of pulse cooling are, how it differs from continuous in the brewing context.
Sure. Yeah. So essentially pulse cooling, talking to a lot of breweries, and speaking at a lot of different conferences and things, you kind of get a fairly blank face response when you ask anyone if they've heard about it. And it was sort of pioneered in the wine industry, but even there, it's not like super widely adopted. But essentially the concept of it is, most breweries, you would have your glycol set up to continuously flow through tanks that are trying to cool. So if you think of a tank trying to hit a set point, it'll just have glycol pump through its jacket until it hits that set point, and then it will shut off and it'll keep flowing to as many tanks as it needs to that are trying to get cold. So that's continuous flow, whereas pulse cooling looks to optimize the heat exchange by pumping cold glycol into the jacket of the tank and then locking that glycol in there for a period of time and maximizing the temperature difference in that heat transfer between the glycol and the beer temperature before sending that glycol back out of the jacket and back to the chiller. Yeah, so there's a couple of things that probably happen there. There's a heat exchange essentially of you have the glycol in beer, which is, well, you get more traction out of it by locking it in there rather than just flowing glycol through the jacket. So it's a more efficient use of it, and you're really maximizing the amount of, or that delta between the glycol temperature and your beer temperature, and really maximizing how much you can suck out of that delta, I guess. And then the other efficiency is when you're sending that glycol, which is now warmer than when it went in, back to your chiller. It works more efficiently in a similar concept because you're now working with a bigger delta there. So your chiller, I'm no big city thermodynamicist, but your chiller will work better. It'll work harder if it's receiving glycol that's at a really similar temperature to its set point. So it's constantly trying to get there, whereas sending warmer glycol back allows you to maximize that heat transfer. And obviously, there's other benefits to not having that glycol flow through all your tanks that are trying to cool at once. It's kind of pulsing different tanks on and off, and that's kind of where you get the efficiencies. But certainly more energy efficient, better for your compressor, better for just wear and tear on your equipment, and you're getting more out of your glycol.
Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive for some people to think that the warmer the glycol, the more efficient the chiller runs. I'm sure there's
like a high point where it wouldn't be efficient, but and generally where the temperatures that your beers are at, passing that whatever that midpoint is, passing that back, definitely more efficient.
Yeah, and you said it originated in the wine industry.
Yeah, that's where most of the theory on it has come from. But even there, like we also work with a bunch of wineries, and it's not that widely known. I think a lot of these, it's one of those things, right? You turn on, Alice can probably speak to this, like when you put something on cooling, you just want it to get to that temperature, and you don't really care about, it just has to do its thing, right? And if it's doing that thing, then like set and forget, and I don't really care what's happening behind the scenes because I just need that thing to happen because I've got 50 other things I need to do in the next hour. So I think people just coming from that, mentality, it's hard to kind of sit back and break down every little bit of your process and try and squeeze efficiencies out of it. But this is one where it's like, the more you kind of understand, you're like, actually, this is definitely how I should be doing things, and I'm getting the same result out of it. My beer's still getting cold. I'm just using less energy to do it.
Is it around the same amount of time it takes to cool with batch pulse cooling compared to continuous?
Yeah, here at Bowden, we've actually found that it's actually saved us a fair bit of time. I guess when we first implemented our brewery here, we just went with an off-the-line China fabricator supplied glycol system, which is on-off switches that you could set temperatures on, and you had to be physically there in the brewery to do that. And then, like Jassa sort of mentioned before, we were noticing a lot of our tanks were getting like preferential flow depending on where they were positioned along the glycol header. So we were having a lot of issues getting some of ours cold at all, let alone in a time suitable to turn it around. So since we implemented it, we've actually probably noticed, I was trying to think about it a little bit earlier at the start here, we probably almost save a day or two overall in terms of cooling it down. We do a couple of steps in our cooling to cool it down in terms of adding some fining at 4 degrees, and then we'll actually go for a hard cold crash to try, and we don't do any filtering, so it's all cold settling. So we want to get as cold as possible, as quickly as possible for the right amount of time. So we're probably saving 1 to 2 days in cooling a batch. And I guess if you sort of extrapolate that out over the whole year, you're probably brewing an extra 2 or 3 batches a year in that same tank. So from our point of view, it is a lot quicker.
It all depends on your, there's variables in there like the size of your tank and how full it is.
Yeah.
Theoretically, it does take longer at a certain size, but because the way the pulsing works, where everything's not trying to get cold at once, that's where the speed efficiency happens, because you're targeting a tank and everything, all the cold glycol is going into that tank and then locking it, and then it's moving to the next one. So that kind of counteracts the fact that it's actually getting glycol less of the time. So theoretically it would take longer to cool, but because I guess everything's knows what's going on around in the loop, it does it so that there's not preferential cooling, it's just targeted cooling. So
yeah.
So with our setup, it's probably a combination of going from what we had before, very, manual on off, continuous flow to the pulse cooling. But I guess coming with that from frigid, we also had the option to set certain tanks to priority cooling. And I'm not sure exactly how that works in the background. Jassa will probably be able to speak to that a little bit in a minute, but that actually allows us to select which tank is more important to get cooler faster. And that helps lower that one ahead of the other tanks. If it was standalone on its own and you only had one tank in your brewery, perhaps pulse cooling would theoretically take longer for it to cool down. But because we've got
Correct.
all of our tanks in a line on the glycol block, for example, our fermenting vessel 1 would be getting all of this continuous flow as that's cold crashing, and then fermenting vessel 2, 3, and 4 are getting less each time. So I guess by using pulse cooling, we can actually focus on getting all of those cold at the same time. And then the other, I guess, benefit that came with our implementation of frigid at the time was it's called a priority setting, which lets us select what sort of tank we want to focus on. So if we do also in this specific example, when we want to try and get our last fermenting vessel in the header cold, that's FV4. So we're trying to cold crash that at the same time we might be cooling FV1. We can set that to priority, and the software sort of focuses on cooling FV4 above the others and helps sort of that preferential flow. So I think
so that's essentially temporarily taking it out of the pulse loop and sending like the cold glycol straight there as a way to ensure if that's like a critical tank that you're canning it or something in the morning and you want it to be at a certain temperature. Yeah, I guess it's just kind of weighing up. Yeah, using pulse cooling wherever possible, but then also weighing up, if there's a need to not use it, then focusing on that. I guess also the byproduct of pulse cooling, the pressure of the glycol going around doesn't need to be as high, so it's less demanding on your circulation pump. It's not trying to pump into 6, 7, 8, 10 vessels at once. It's pulsing 1 or 2 on at a time. So there's a lot less pressure needed to flow through the header.
Yeah, really interesting. Alex, where did you first learn about pulse cooling? Because obviously I learned it from Jassa.
I also learned it from Jassa.
Just the bonus response.
Yeah.
So like I said before, we sort of, when we first commissioned our brewery 3 years ago, we had, I guess, the off-the-shelf Chinese fabricated glycol system installed, and we ran that for about 6 months. And about the same time, 2 things happened. I guess we bought a small canning machine, and we realized we were struggling to get our tanks cold enough to be able to can well. And we also hosted an Independent Brewers Association meeting in our venue at the same time, which is, I guess, where a group of independent brewers around the area will get together, I guess, discuss any issues or anything that people have found. And it just happened that Jassa was presenting about his frigid cloud pulse cooling solution at that. So I guess, hearing about that in presentation form and having a chat to him afterwards in our own venue, we were pretty keen to sort of find out more about it and give it a go.
That's awesome. So, okay, the ultimate question is, Jess, where do you learn about pulse cooling?
So it's honestly, I guess, if I take a step back, sort of how we started our platform was working with one of the local brewers here to put some affordable automation in, because those guys, probably similar to yourself, Alex and Jacob Bowden, they came from a kind of engineering background where they were like, there's got to be easier ways to do the stuff we're doing, but it can't all be that expensive. So we kind of built our product with brewers to make it affordable automation, but then in doing that, having the software control the chiller and essentially the glycol demand, it kind of got us really digging into how what else we could be doing here, because it doesn't make sense to just smash your compressor and your chiller just because you're trying to get everything cold. Like if we're doing it or in an automation way, there's got to be more efficiencies to it than just on and off. So we sort of went down a path with that, and then some people that we work with are in the energy efficiency space, and sort of with them as well, started digging into a few things, some introductions to the wine industry and reading about it there, and then really starting our own trials on that. And that's probably where we've been quantifying most of our data through. We're doing something with Adelaide University, who have a big brewing and winemaking course that they do. Obviously, it's a big wine country where we are here in South Australia. So we're doing some trials with those guys to further quantify not only what the saving that we're getting out of pulse cooling, but I guess like where we can take it to from here as a concept.
Yeah, that's awesome. I did a bunch of research on it as well. It's like I couldn't find. I was trying to find the origins of it, of this cooling, because I was just like, who? I mean, I just think it might be you, Jassa, to be honest. At the end of the day, but yeah, I think there was a professor from like UC Davis, I think, who did some tasting some wine. I was just like, yeah, and it wasn't even that long ago.
I reckon when I was in California the last time I was there, like a couple of weeks ago, I think I drove past like the university where the main study that we've been reading comes out of. I should drop in there and
drop in there. Try to get him on a video to be like, hey, Jassa introduced me to schooling.
That's true.
So Alex, is there any other benefits you've seen? I mean, of course, it said it saved you time and I guess more accuracy, and managed to get the cooling to the temperatures that you want, which is pretty significant. Is there any other things you've seen in the operations side?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, they're probably sort of related to the points I've already mentioned, but I guess when we first brought it on and we were having trouble with our canning machine, we're still able to can, but the product wasn't quite cool enough. So we're getting a lot of wastage from foaming over and short fill cans and things like that. So in our particular instance, I've seen it be able to achieve lower temperatures on all of our tanks. And that's helped probably save a fair bit of wastage. Also, when we first started up brewing, we had our 4 fermenters, and they're just the off-the-shelf fabricators glycol system we had was sort of struggling to keep up with our other 4. We had sort of just ruled out, that's how many tanks we'll be able to have. We've sort of maxed out what we've got. But since implementing that and seeing that it started working, we've actually been able to add on another double-sized tank. And I guess, that one comes up, it actually tees off of our glycol header. So it sort of, takes its own flow altogether, which I think if we were just doing continuous flow, it would have been a bit of a nightmare. Either would have taken all of it or none of it. But with the priority setting that Frigid has sort of given us, we're able to still sort of use this double tank alongside all of the other 4 as well. I guess it sort of fueled that expansion as well. And I guess obviously the one that we haven't discussed yet, which I assume we're going to dig into a little bit, is sort of the energy savings. That's the background. So
yeah, that's one of the big topics we're going to cover. Just to clear up, Alex, effectively, I guess your options were improving the size of the glycol chiller or reservoir. Was that what you were looking at before this?
That was an option. Having only just run for 6 months, and we've sort of what it's like starting up a brewery. All of our capital is pretty much gone. We were sort of at the point where we were just going to live with it. Track, like if we, maybe after a year or something, yes, we probably would have looked at getting a larger glycol block or cooling system. But we'd sort of like, without that, we would have made up our mind, probably live with it, live with the wastage, the extra tank time. We might be selectively brewing into our fermenting vessels 1 and 2, which actually do get cold enough, instead of 3 and 4 if we wanted to can it. So I guess it would have just added a different sort of way of thinking, longer times, and more of a nuisance, I guess, without it.
Yeah, I'd never even considered that side of it. It's really cool. I've worked in breweries where the chiller has been an issue. It's a painful piece of equipment to have an issue with. Wastage is high, constantly battling to get tanks, the temperature. One brewery I worked out, I was just scavenging. So when a beer was down at like minus, I could get it to like 0. I was scavenging cold from there to try. It was just, the whole thing was a mess. So it's really cool to hear. I never even considered that side of it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I think we're sort of seeing some of that scavenging, maybe unintentionally, when we had continuous flow. If you're trying to cold crash 2 tanks at once, if it's like the end one in the line, it's sort of taking, from the other ones, or it's only getting the hot stuff that's already coming through. But I guess to sort of round out, what sort of setup we've got, we do also, so we've got the 4 fermenting vessels, but we've also got 4 stacked bright tanks, which are half the size of our fermenters, stacked on top of the fermenters. So they're also all hooked up to the cooling system. But we use those pretty much as serving tanks, which we keep at 4 degrees Celsius, and they go straight into our taps, and we serve from them. So when we were starting, we were actually, if we needed the tank and needed to turn it around, we would, you might keg one of your serving tanks and you transfer up what you wanted to can out of the fermenting vessel 4 into a serving tank. And that way you could let it sit there for another week to actually get cold enough. obviously then you need to, clean, purge and everything else that tank multiple times. So that would have been a way around that as well, but yeah, a lot more hassle. So
That's nuts. Yeah, it's funny what you end up doing and what becomes normal to get what you need to be done. Alex, as well, batch cooling on fermentations, does that have an effect on the fermentation process, the control of the temperature? And of course, because fermentation is hand in hand with the quality of the beer. Do you notice any big differences or changes in how temperatures were stabilizing during the fermentation?
So not during fermentation. I mean, it's a very easy to use sort of, I guess, app interface. But I guess, for example, finishing ferment and then dropping it down to a dry hop temperature is like a much easier drop for our cooling system to do than dropping it down from that temperature then down to cold crashing. So we didn't see any slower times or anything.
I think one thing we are, it's big on that, and it does tie back into the stuff we're doing with Pulse is everything, all the data's logged like every minute in real time. So I guess a benefit people are getting out of, when you talk about stabilization of ferments and things, is you now can get that granular data of what exactly has been happening in the tank, up to when you can kind of see, in the graphs where it's been pulsing and where you can kind of see the cycle of it. And I think that, as a benefit, and I've heard one of your other podcasts on this with, is it Anchor Napa? Yeah, around like the more you can learn about your product, the better you can make it, right? Like the more data points you have on it, which is, something we're big on across all of our features is like learning from the data, and then, sort of sharing that data so that, there's a benefit to the wider community on that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. For our core range ones that we're brewing repeatedly, it is good to sort of look back and see that historical sort of fermentation temperature log from that app as well. Something we didn't have, again, when we had the simplest form on off and we could just look at the instantaneous temperature at the time. So, that was actually quite useful to us as well.
One of the things I was thinking about pulse cooling and in general is, and we're like, obviously thinking, why hasn't it been the standard for a long time? It's always, it always makes you question, like, what, it makes a lot of sense. And when you do the research and you hear this and you're like, well, yeah, of course, everything ticks all the boxes, but why isn't it happening? I guess the major challenge is that for a lot of brewers is that control side, because if you were to do that on your own, it's a total challenge. Obviously, you need that automation to control that.
Well, there's nuances to it, right? Like Alex is saying, with prioritizing things, and there does need to be some touch and feel as to how you're switching between prioritizing tanks and pulsing tanks and all that sort of stuff. So I think that is the barrier, right? Just the automation side of it. But these days, it shouldn't be as it should be a lot easier to implement than it has been ever before, right? Because we're in an age of where this sort of stuff is becoming the norm. So
as software and control sort of improves as we go, I can sort of see how that's getting better and better. I imagine before there was any sort of software or control, people were probably just manually, half opening a valve versus, quarter opening. And they sort of have to sit down, watch it and open and close the valves themselves. So I guess that's probably where continuous flow would have maybe originated from, is that they just always wanted to have that supply there so they could open and close it.
Yeah.
Now that there's more control and the software is capable of doing these calculations and changes quicker.
Yeah. And everything's talking to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good point. As technology's improved, it makes a lot of sense. Just a question, I'm not sure it's in the flow of this, but it's just coming to my head. How long generally does the glycol get locked into the jacket for?
Yeah, so we've got, it depends. There's some variables in there like tank size and things like that. And also, like glycol temperature and that kind of thing. But it's a matter of minutes, like depending on, I would say probably between 3 minutes and 10 minutes or something. Just depends on a number of variables, but it's not that long. But then also, we've got some stuff in there that kind of, and that's what I was talking about with the data. The more we can kind of learn about that, the more we can optimize, like, what's the best pulse cooling profile for a tank of this size. And then if you've got a tank of that size, we can start to apply that automatically across our, all of our customers, and everyone's kind of benefiting from the data that everyone's using to, optimize it for everyone, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
How
just
did
learning
you-
from the data that we're collecting. Yeah.
So what I'm trying to think here is like, I used to work in a brewery where you had like an automated brewery. And so they might have continuous cooling and they're thinking, okay, well, I want to understand pulse cooling more so that I can
Mhm.
apply that to my automation. So I'm trying to think like,
Mhm.
how did you come about, building that automation? It'd be just like really great to learn.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we were lucky enough that the brewery we're working with kind of like took a leap of faith and lent us a few of their tanks that they were production brewing in to test some of this stuff out on. But really, it's become like, I guess, the framework we've built, as I sort of alluded to before, it's like everything we're doing captured and recorded so that we can just keep making it better and better so that when we go into a brewery, it probably falls into category A, B, or C. And that's the starting point. Well, it's a category B size brewery. This is the starting point for the profile that we're going to put in terms of timing and logic. And then we always dial it in with customers. And once we sort of understand that data after a few weeks, but yeah, that's the benefit, I guess, of having a decent customer base now. We're getting a lot of learnings out of that, and we can benchmark different metrics across breweries to give them the sort of the best starting point for the pulse logic, and then build it out from there.
Yeah, that's
I mean, enough to your question, it is a lot of trial and error. And we also tend to meter the chiller energy usage at most of our clients. So we can like constantly understand, what if we turn pulse off for the week, and it obviously depends on what your production schedule is, and you got to pick two that are similar, but we can turn it all off for a week. So they're running it as they were before, they have pulse cooling, and then we can run a similar production cycle with it turned on. And then you kind of start to pull data out of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And presumably, again, just thinking about the automation, you have to interlock the rest of the jackets when you exit the glycol out of say you've just locked it in for 5-10 minutes, or however long it is, and then you sending that warm glycol out, you then have to interlock the rest of the jackets, right? So that you can send that
Depends
back.
on the setup. I mean, if it's going straight into a return loop, that isn't going bypassing through any other tanks. It'll just go straight back to the to the chiller, which is fine. If it's in like a system whereby other tanks could potentially receive that now very warm glycol, then they'll
that makes sense. Alex, I'm not sure, did you have to make any changes or adjustments to your operations when you implemented pulse cooling, or was it pretty straightforward?
Not really. No, it's pretty straightforward. I guess, from the tech installing and then us doing the quick run through it made a lot of sense. Yeah, in terms of recipes and everything and following the same sort of profile, we didn't have to change anything there. I guess, like I said before, if anything, we could probably shorten our timelines a little bit. Previously, I guess, on our estimations of time, we might allow the day to cool it down to this point and then another day to cool it down to that point. Whereas if we can start that at, before I go to bed and it's ready in the morning, maybe we sort of shortened our recipes overall. But in terms of production, no real impacts. Yeah.
That's cool. And what about sort of the monitoring and maintenance? Did you have to do anything different with the new system?
Monitoring makes it easier, I guess, in terms of because you still can't, you can still potentially have hardware issues. And we have had a few issues where our glycol unit's gone down, and I guess Bridget has actually sort of alerted us to that. Whereas, if say it happened on a Friday night, we went home for the weekend, Monday morning you'd come in and everything would be hot. Whereas I guess the monitoring control of the Frigid app, I guess, interface shows you the temperatures and everything on the screens, but it also gives you alerts, I guess, if any tanks sort of drift too far from their set points. So if we see one that's cooling start to go up 2 degrees, it'll send us an alert, either an email or an SMS, and it'll alert us that something is not right. And each time that it's done that, it's been with our glycol cooling. So we've had to sort of come in and maybe a breaker's switched or something like that. And we're just actually last week, we're going through, I guess, the process of adding our glycol storage itself onto our app so that we can actually monitor that directly instead of waiting for one of the tanks to get 2 degrees. We can actually do the set point of our glycol tank.
I think the other one is your pulse cooling. It actually uses less energy, right? So the compressor's working less to get the same result. So I don't have any hard stats on long-term effects of it, but it's going to be better for wear and tear. And if you're just not running it as much, then it's got to obviously be better for it and make it last longer. I'll get into some of the energy saving stuff while I'm at it, but I think all the trials we've done internally and also some third-party trials that we've had done independently, there's a lot of variables that go into the energy savings. So obviously the size of the brewery, the chiller, exactly what you're running through your production cycle at the time. That we've seen savings anywhere from 10 to 30% of kilowatt usage of your chiller, which is, depending on what your rates are, is quite significant, especially. And I've found if you're running that capacity, the more you're using it, the better the savings are going to be. So for people running a capacity, I think that's where the pulse cooling comes into its own, because everything's getting optimized heat transfer end to end. So that's probably where the best savings are had. And then in a similar vein, not directly related to pulse cooling, but just that scheduling things as well, like your HMT, for instance. We talked to a lot of breweries that they'll turn it on sort of the night before, like Alex was just saying, so that when they come in the morning, it's ready to go. Or worst case, they turn it on Friday before they leave and it runs all weekend. But by capturing the data of what's going on with HMT, we can kind of work out exactly how long it takes to get back up to temp from whatever the low point is that it hits over that period of time, and then automate that. So things like when we talk about carbon offsetting and just using less energy, being able to just reduce the runtime of your HLT is massive, like an instant saving, not only dollars, but also obviously energy use. And I think one of the breweries we work with, and we worked out, we saved them about 100 hours of runtime a week on their HLT, which is it equates to like quite a big figure, and depending on the size of your HLT, it's quite a lot of kilowatts. But it all just comes down to what you said before. It's like you can do those things manually, but automating them is obviously, as soon as you start doing things manually, you got to take into account the time that it takes to do them, and then you're going to be paying some the time to do it, and then you got to remember to do it, and you're probably going to be there at 3 a.m. to turn on HLT. So I think when you add all those things up and say, well, automation definitely, for all these things, it's like that is the one thing that kind of stands in the way of bringing these efficiencies into place.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you mentioned there, Jess, on the energy savings, it's in between 5 and what percent was it?
Between 10 and 30% are the
10 and 30%
studies that we've.
And that's of your glycol chiller's electricity.
Your chiller, like the actual compressor from your chiller, like its usage, so dropping by 10 to 30%. So I guess the pulse cool, that's just on pulse cooling alone, but then there's other things to take into account when you're automating things. So the big one for us is thermal storage. So thinking about like optimizing when you use energy. So if you have an on-peak, off-peak rate with your energy tariffs, when you're paying less for it, which is at the moment, that's generally at night when your compressor runs better anyway, because the ambient temperature is cooler. You overwork the compressor then. So that comes through either over chilling beers that are at a point in their fermentation cycle where they can take a degree or two extra. So it's actively fermenting, but if you're holding it at temp, you can certainly pump an extra degree into it, and also into your glycol, like the chiller itself. And obviously your chiller's going to work harder, but you're paying less for it. And then when you click into a peak rate, your chiller will switch off, and it will just use that thermally stored energy to slowly creep back up to set point. And we've seen some really good energy saving results from that. And then if you have solar, you can do it when you're getting free energy as well. And then that's like the ultimate position to be in, because you're using as much energy as you can when you're not paying for it, and then when you are paying for it, ideally you're using not much at all.
Yeah, that's really smart. Because the tariffs in the UK now, I assume there's similar ones in Australia, but energy when they're like a real time rate, if you could integrate with that or understand those rates. But I mean, generally, as you said, nighttime's always cheaper, but there are times where you can get really good rates. And in fact, they can almost, in peak demands, they'll actually pay you to stop using electricity. So if your general usage is X and you go, if you don't use electricity, we'll pay you X amount, then you can see that and use less.
Yeah, we work with them. There's one here called Amber. So we've done an integration with them, and it's exactly that. So it's like a kind of demand response situation. So like a energy wholesaler, and you're basically at the mercy of whatever kilowatt price they're dictating that hour. But you kind of get these programmatically, you receive alerts for when those things are coming in. So you can prepare for that by either over chilling something for a little bit because it's cheap now and you know it's going to be like the spikes are high. Like you could pay $10 a kilowatt or something stupid. But then, like you said, you could get paid to not use it, or you can actually get paid like when the grid's full of renewables and they need to draw energy out, you can get paid to draw more energy. So being able to do that, I mean, we're actually piecing together something on that at the moment, but the guy or the brewery that we put it in at here in SA, they were saving something like $2,000 a month just by having it automate around their real-time tariffs, which is pretty wild. Like it's what they were paying before. I'm like, man, that seems like unless you're prepared to actually do something about the rates, you're going to be ready to respond to those network events.
Yeah, I've also seen some like energy management systems that effectively do the whole brewery for you, so they can control things on and off and chillers off, not glycol chillers generally, but turning like chilled room chillers off, just any sort of high electricity usage, turn it off when it spikes and turn them on when they get paid. And there's a lot of opportunity for people out there now who are willing to go at it. Now, I completely appreciate a lot of brewers probably this going, I've got 1,500 things to think in an hour. The last thing I want to think about is my electricity usage on top of that. But that's why you buy automation to do that for you.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Alex, do you know from your first hand what sort of energy savings you saw at Bowden?
Yeah. So I guess I don't know the exact figures. We did see sort of an instant energy drop from our bill, but we've only just recently had the meter installed on the glycol unit on its own. So we were sort of looking at our overall energy bill, which includes the kitchen and the bar and everything as well. So we did see a drop, but yeah, I guess we've had the meter installed for a month now. I'm not sure whether you've got any figures on your end, Jassa, but I mean, at a guess, it'd probably be around the 20% mark, which is sort of the mid-range of what we quoted before.
The indicative stuff we've got out of the meters is around the 20% mark. Again, it just depends on kind of what you've been doing that week as well, because it's hard to, like I was saying before, when you're comparing, pulse cooling to no pulse cooling, you've got to find a comparable block of hours to make it a reasonable comparison. But yeah, certainly it's around that 20% mark, and also other breweries of that size, it's on a very similar trend to the savings that they've seen there. So I think, by and large, the best is when it's coming off your bill, like you said, Alex, but actually quantifying it down to exactly what the pulse cooling saving is. That is why we sort of do the metering on the chillers to really dig into that.
But if there's a way to
quantify as best you can.
To justify it for brewers, I think, because I'm starting to think of everything in like a per liter price. I'm wondering if you can, like you're saying, it's hard to compare, week to week because you do things differently. I wonder if you could look at like batches of beer and say, I know this batch of beer was 1,000 liters and this is the cooling you used during that.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a way to sort of compare like energy price per liter.
No, that's a great idea.
Yeah, that's a real relatable figure. Yeah, that's awesome. Is there actually a first question I'm going to ask is, are there any competitors to what you're doing at the moment, Jassa?
I mean, there's a lot of automation. Like there's different ways of automating things, and there's a lot of places that offer automation. I guess I haven't seen anyone doing what we're doing in terms of the automation that's tied in with energy usage and trying to offset that. So definitely haven't seen anything like that in the the industry that we're working in with especially with brewers. But in terms of, I guess, where it can go, I mean, this all comes back to that data I was talking about before. So we've definitely got leaning on, and it sounds like a buzzword, but leaning on like machine learning and AI to make some cooling decisions in real time, right? Because they've got so much data now, and we continually collect data every minute for every brewery that we have on what their cooling is doing, and then you tie that in with energy meter data, and that for me is if it can start adjusting things automatically to not only around tariffs but around what it knows from every other time it's brewed those beers, then I think that's where the future of it is, just automatically, just constantly dialing it in so that it gets it, the pulsing is down to the second of what that is the best for that tank and what's in that tank. And I think that's the kind of exciting stuff, I think, right? Like we could get to a point where it, and I'd love to see the data comparison now and then 3 years from now to see how much we manage to dial it in, or it dials itself in, as we're hoping.
We talked about that in the episode on AI, which Anchor was, I almost didn't want to do because I called it AI in brewing, but because he was like, another buzzword. This is not what I'm about. But I was like, come on, man, this is what everyone wants to hear. Yeah, we were talking about, automated fermentations and how that reality is happening in a lot of breweries already, but how that can happen for a craft brewer. I think that'd be such a powerful thing. Be really cool.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we do. I mean, and that's the other big thing about, I think, the brewing community in general is like, it's a community, right? Like people like working together, and one of the things that we are big on are collaborating with other people that are doing things that we're not doing, to kind of make our product better. And one of the things is integrating with, we do integration with Plato, where it does exactly that. So based on real-time gravity readings, it'll manage temperature changes for you, and then it's kind of put it in and let it go, and it should come out the other end ready to go. But I think that sort of stuff, I think the more of platforms that are out there collecting data, and the more you can cross-reference that, there's some real gains to be had, I think. But it comes back to that thing we said at the beginning of like, if it's working, I'm not changing it unless there's a very compelling reason to do so.
Yeah. Alex, did you have any brewing software at Bowden that needed to be integrated with Frigid?
No, not really. Not with the Frigid app. Because I guess we went just from manual on off all hard.
Okay,
to this. But I guess sort of just maybe I was just thinking again, Jassa, back on that point, and you might already be doing this because we're previously sort of talking about having the ability to turn tanks on to priority so that they get more flow or whatever. Maybe the future, and maybe it is AI related, but it sort of might look at your configuration of tanks and, control the pulses so that, say, our last fermenter FV4 in the chain isn't being penalized by being used at the same time as the others. Maybe they can somehow talk together. So you can,
for sure,
get all your tanks 100% even. So you don't even have to worry about putting one on priority because you just know, something will be looking after.
And it would be more energy efficient as well. I think that there's also, stuff we're developing around, like, depending on what, the set point's trying to do. So, a crash versus a hold versus like a soft crash, and what's the optimal pulsing for those different scenarios. Because there's obviously the size of it, but then there's also the distance you're trying to shift a temperature, which comes into play. So like, what's the most energy efficient way we can get from point A to point B within a reasonable time frame, and then also not at the expense of the other tanks in the system.
Yeah, I guess that's where I was getting at from my production point of view. Like, I love the priority setting, and it's saved us. It means we can use any tank for canning. But if the software could somehow learn from the configuration over time, maybe data collected, and it could actually equalize all the tanks so they're treated 100% equally, that might mean my first fermenter FV1 is only pulsing for 3 seconds, whereas FV4 pulses for 10 seconds. But like, it somehow equalizes. So I don't even have to think about priority more. They're just all sort of 100% equal tanks in my eyes.
That's very cool.
Future technology.
Yeah, that's sick. Yeah, cool. That'd be a really cool feature. Alex, you know what? Just actually shared with me an article recently about a beer that you did. And I'm big into sustainability. It's one of the things that I do on the day-to-day. So I'm just going to take some time of this podcast, if that's all right. If you just mind going through a bit about that article, which I will link in the show notes for everyone. But if you could just go through about that like incredible beer that you made, I think it'll be awesome.
Yeah. So there was a number of different processes and ingredients that we sort of put into this. I guess the idea is we were trying to create, I guess, the most sustainable beer that we could with whatever we had, whatever resources we could pull on, whatever ingredients we could pull on. So I guess from, a few different points of view, the ingredients were sort of one we focused on heavily when we were doing recipe creation. And we quickly landed on trying to utilize a new malt, or newish malt to the brewing industry, is called Kernza malt, which is a perennial wheatgrass. It has been used a little bit in the States. I managed to find a local grower and malter who are just starting to kick off their platform here, who are experimenting with some. So they managed to source us a little bit of this Kernza malt. So they made sort of base Kernza malt as well as a crystal Kernza malt. And I guess the difference between Kernza versus barley and grain is that it's a perennial wheatgrass. So I guess instead of tilling it each year and mowing up the soil and re-sowing year after year, you allow the root structure to continue growing. And then, I guess during the season, it'll pop up and you can just harvest it again. So it keeps, sequestering all that carbon down in the soil. So that was ingredient 1. Ingredient 2 actually used locally grown hop flowers. So they were unprocessed. So I guess, whole hop flowers, they were dried, but they hadn't gone through, the cryogenic process of being turned into pelletizing them and then shipping halfway across the world as well. We are lucky enough to be right next door to a small bakery as well. And typically towards the end of the day, they'll have, leftover bread. So we asked if instead of throwing them out or composting those, if we could grab whatever they had the night before the brew so that we could use what we call yesterday's bread in there as well to supplement some of the grain bill. And then I guess the last sort of ingredient we really wanted to focus on was the yeast as well. So there's a new yeast supplier or newish yeast supplier in South Australia called Vivero Yeast. And he has started propagating a Kvike style yeast. So obviously we wanted to use this yeast from a sustainability point of view because it sort of ties in with the cooling savings we can get from pulse coolings because we can actually ferment this at 35 degrees. So we don't need to cool down the wort as much. And we also don't need to pretty much cool it all during fermentation. We can just let that one go. And then the only cooling we really have to do is for conditioning before we package it as well. So that's sort of like, I guess, kicked off. I mean, that was all the ingredients that we sort of tackled. But then we also wanted to try and tackle all the waste from these ingredients as well. So we partnered with the local mushroom grower, Westside Mushies, and they took our spent grain and actually they took it straight out of the mash tun, so it was sterilized and went in and allowed it to cool down and then started inoculating it. And we made sure, because we had a launch event for this beer, so we made sure we had about a month before sort of beer could, finish. And so that he had enough time to sort of cultivate these mushrooms so that we could actually bring them back in-house. And on the same day as the event, we were serving tacos with, spent grain grown mushrooms straight on there as well. And then, I guess obviously tried to tie the loop up with the, minimizing the cooling, all of those ingredients. And then each pint we sold on the day of the event as well. So Jassa Amir and a couple of other of the crew and some gardening companies and our local council, we all sort of partnered together to plant a tree for each pint that we sold over the day as well. So there's some good shots in the article there of Jassa and me planting a few trees. And a few beers afterwards as well.
Yeah, man. It was such a great story. Like, loved it. Like, loved the closing of the loop, like the whole mushrooms growing on the spent grain, bringing them back into tap room. Just a great story, man. And like really, really respected the approach. Kernza is a really cool grain, but it's really cool that you found a local producer of that. And like, it just sounds like a great beer. I wish I could have got my hands on it. That probably would be slightly off topic if you were to then send me a case to the UK. So
we actually to make it even harder, we tried to minimize any packaging waste as well. So we elected not to can it at all, just keg it into stainless steel rings.
We'll send you a keg.
So still get the growler and
But yeah, man, that's like 10 out of 10. I thought it was a cool story, and anyone wants to read it and see the pictures of everything, like I'll link the article. But yeah, I think anyone who's like looking to make a story out of sustainability, I just thought it was such a cool way of doing it. Really appreciate that.
We had a lot of fun. And a lot of locals got around it on the release as well, which was good to see a big turnout for the event. So just goes to show customers are intrigued by it all as well. So
yeah, especially when you got a cool story, I feel like that really helps get people involved. Yeah, awesome. So what I like to do in the show notes, if it's okay with you guys, is just share some contact details if someone wants to reach out and ask some questions, either to you, Alex, about the beer that you made, or even about the technology, or maybe just about brewing in Australia. I don't know if that's all right. I could share some Instagram, LinkedIn, or like an email or something.
Yeah, email's probably easiest for me. So
yeah, nice. And then same with you, Jassa, if that's all right. So people can get
for sure
if they're interested.
No,
I mean, that's it. Well, thank you so much, guys. It was like something I've been wanting to do for ages. As he said, like, it's just been blowing my mind about how the energy savings around this and the origin story. And I love things that challenge the way that our status quo and just the way that we've always done things. So thanks, guys.
No, awesome. Thanks, Chris. I'll see you in a few weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, I was talking about the Brewers Congress before you guys came on. Jassa, you're going to be there.
Yes. Yeah. No, in the flesh, it'll be fun. I'll be talking a lot about post cooling, so come along.
Yeah, have you got a talk on
Yes.
cooling?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
Just on sustainable concepts and things. So yeah,
Awesome.
that should be good. Got a little stand there. So yeah, looking forward to meeting a few people.
Ah, sweet. Well, that's ideal then. If anyone's listening to this, a lot of UK listeners here. So if anyone is wanting to learn more about it, you can go see Jassa in the flesh in the Brewers Congress as well.
Cool. Thanks, man.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for listening to another episode of Modern Brewer Podcast. Don't forget, if you want some sweet Modern Brewer Podcast merch, all you have to do is share the podcast on Instagram or LinkedIn and tag me in it. And you'll be entered into the prize to win a sweet t-shirt like I am wearing right now, or even the lucky few who might get a hoodie. So once again, thanks so much for listening. If you've got any questions, any feedback, please never hesitate to get in contact with me. And I will catch you on the next episode of the Modern Brewer Podcast.